Thank you.
For another session, and I'll be joined on stage by Janet Pogue McLaurin, partner and head of global research at Gensler, the architecture firm, as well as Andrew Robertson, chairman of BBDO Worldwide, the creative advertising agency. So in this session, we'll build a little bit on what we just heard from Linda Hill, a wonderful session on innovation and creativity. This session will focus on what are those exact practices to get to that place of high value game changers that Linda just mentioned. And we are so blessed to have two folks who are working in very creative industries and have seen a lot of creative projects through. So first, I'd love to start with this current context. We heard a lot about today about AI pressures, about layoffs, about budget cuts. That's left a lot of people feeling like they don't have what they need to think outside of the box and be creative. So I want to start, what first happens to creativity when we have more constraints? Maybe Janet, I'll start with you.
Creativity at Gensler, everything has constraints. You know, when we're a design firm, so we're doing projects in terms of buildings and the like, budget constraints, schedule constraints, what our clients need constraints, oftentimes site constraints, or even how do we do a net zero building. And so we've reframed it to talk about what is the design problem? What is the challenge that we're actually solving for? And by reframing it into a mindset around, okay, how do we dig into this and really solve it well, starts to free up those constraints, because we've often found that the more constraints there are, the more out of the box you have to think about it. It's not just refining an idea, it's really coming at it from a completely different standpoint.
That makes sense. Andrew, how do you think about constraints?
Yeah, I think there's often a confusion between real constraints, which are a good thing, and what I'll call grisly guidelines, which are not so good. And you usually get a lot of grisly guidelines pretending to be constraints. And you have to get rid of the grisly guidelines and focus in on what the real constraints are. Elon Musk, who has lots of things wrong with him and lots of things right with him, but he has this thing that the only real constraints are the laws of physics. Everything else can and should be challenged. And I think that this really does come down to defining the problem that you're trying to solve in as beautiful a way as you possibly can, because if you can define it in a way that makes it feel like a puzzle that you just can't wait to try and solve, you are going to generate, it's going to unlock creativity and generate lots of ideas and solutions. If I give an example, a problem that lots of people have tried to solve is, how do we reduce wait times in our call centers? It's a perfectly good problem. But if you actually push it a little bit further and change it to, how do we reduce perceived wait times in our call centers, which is actually the real problem. Doesn't matter how long it takes, it's how long you think it's taking. That unlocks a whole load of other solutions and also gets rid of a load that have been used. Telling me my call is important and thanking me for waiting is nice once, but if you do it the second time, you're actually increasing my perceived wait time, whereas you could play me a load of music and reduce my perceived wait time. So I think it's pushing and pushing and pushing for a problem definition that is full of really good constraints, but is so exciting and tantalizing you can't help but try and come up with ideas.
Andrew, I'll stay with you because you wrote a lot about this in your book, The Creative Shift, which there are still copies outside in the book fair if people haven't picked up their copy yet. And I believe you told me that you're willing to sign any copies that people want.
Yeah.
And in that book, you detail the whole creative process at BBDO, which people may not know. The term brainstorming was actually popularized by one of those initials.
Yeah.
So what does the creative process look like at BBDO, and how can people emulate it?
So I tried to codify it because we don't exist without creativity. That's all we have. But most of the clients that we work with and most of the companies that I've observed trying to to solve the problem of creativity have a different set of issues, and their business works on different metrics in many ways. But really what it comes down to is 4 things. 1, defining a really great problem, which is a step that is usually skipped over because unconsciously most organizations create a pressure for solutions. And everybody rushes to try and come up with solutions instead of spending a little longer poking at and probing and creating a really great problem. So that's step number 1. Step number 2 is to generate lots of bad ideas. Lots and lots of bad ideas. My colleague in the Philippines, David Guerrero, wrote a book called The Crap Ideas Book, which he actually published on recycled elephant dung. And the premise of the book was, if only 1 idea in 10 is good, you're going to need 10 ideas. And again, what happens in most organizations is you unconsciously create the pressure for people to have a good idea, which is really, really hard. Instead of that, you actually have to have a moment, a phase, where your goal is to generate lots and lots and lots of ideas. And most of them are going to be terrible, and that's fantastic. The third step is judging the ideas, which you need to separate from generating the ideas. Usually, again, most organizations, that's not what happens. As people are having ideas, they're being judged. You have to separate it, generate lots of ideas, then judge them. And then once you've judged and picked the right one, you move to execution. And the most important thing about execution is let the people who know how to paint, paint. Leave execution to the people who execute brilliantly. Those are the 4 very, very simple to say steps, but really, really hard to do in most organizations. And that's why I think you have to institutionalize. John Cleese said, creativity is not a talent, it's a way of operating. And I think that you have to recognize that, and as leaders, create that discipline to separate the question from the generation of ideas, from the judging of the ideas, from the execution of those ideas, if you're going to find those big, meaty, creative ideas.
That makes sense. And what stands out to me is that AI seems to be changing how each of those steps is being done. Janet, I know at Gensler you have some new research recently. So how is AI changing the creative process?
Well, we're supplementing it. So think about, analytics, generating a number of bad ideas using AI. So the human comes into it of really judging those, trying to think through empathy, meaning, which of these makes the most sense for this particular client, which in terms of the right project or the right problem that you're trying to solve. And so there's ways of being able to supplement it. We just finished the research that you just mentioned. And what we found is AI power users, they actually spend less time working alone. They spend more time learning. They spend more time socializing and connecting with people. And in the process, they've got stronger team relationships. It's the exact opposite of what I was just reading in other media over the week. Brian Elliott got it right, wherever Brian is, pushing back to some of that research. Because we see that AI actually has the potential to make the workplace more human, and for us to actually be spending our time leaning into the things that AI cannot do, that only humans can do, and that is a lot of the judgment. Leave some of the execution and video storytelling to AI. We're pushing the limits on that and coming up with some creative ways, but it's always in service of humans and humans at the helm.
That makes sense. And so when it comes to helping folks build those relationships to help people feel the psychological safety necessary to generate these bad ideas, how do you suggest leaders walk into the room to lead these brainstorming, creative sessions, and have folks show up in their most creative selves? Janet, I'll stay with you.
I think it's really around leaders creating the conditions for creativity. Leaders should not be the ones walking in with all the answers, but how do you create the environment for all the great comments and ideas coming from everybody in the room. We believe strongly of also starting with the right problem, not just solving the problem right. And we're a research-based design firm, so we start with research. But then we quickly step back of how do we look at and get everybody collaborating in the room with all the different viewpoints and voices. Sometimes it's even the voices of who we're designing for, and making sure that that's present in the room. So from a leadership standpoint, it's creating those conditions for that to really happen.
Yeah, and I think leaders have to poke at the question, make sure the question is good. Then they have to demonstrate that for the time that is being allocated to generating ideas, bad ideas are great. And the best way to do that is to have 3 bad ideas yourself as the leader, because what that does, all ideas generate more ideas. But as the leader, if you can show that you are capable of having 3 crappy ideas, then everybody else can as well.
Model the behavior, right?
Correct, as opposed to what have you got, and that one's good and that one isn't. I think that proof of the value of lots of bad ideas in that phase, I stress this, it's not like you don't want this all the time. If MasterCard was busy encouraging anybody to have an idea and try it out at any point, the whole system would collapse. You don't want that. You do want it when you're trying to solve a problem. And that's what creativity is. So I think the question, demonstrating how wonderful bad ideas are, and then making sure that the organization is disciplined about separating the 4 steps, those are the key things that the leader has to do.
That makes sense. And apart from this psychological safety, relationships, I think another important skill that you mentioned is judgment. So when you get into that phase, when you're paring down all the bad ideas from the good ones, how do you teach folks to be good at telling what is a good idea?
I think it starts with exposure. Working on teams that you actually see how people are modeling that behavior. How are they navigating the uncertainty? How are they reaching a conclusion of assessing these ideas, and which one should we really go with? We look for how to have involvement and engagement from the very beginning of a project through the end, trying to do small and mighty teams that instead of really large teams that you're handing off a project, you have a small team that starts to grow with the project and lead it from the beginning to the end, even though you may be bringing on more disciplines along the way, especially as you get to execution. But having that exposure and that ability to watch and learn, and then start to not only watch, but now start to lead. And we often use our internal initiatives as a way of learning that leadership skill and trying it in a safe space before just trying it with a client or on a project.
So early leaders will first lead an internal project, is that what you're saying?
Yes, oftentimes. Now they're part of a project team, and as their judgment starts to get better and better, and that exposure, they may start to take on more and more within that project team, under the guise of a safety net of a senior person that is making sure that everything is moving forward. But they're learning how to lead with a number of internal projects, and we use those as catalysts across our whole firm to start to grow those leadership development skills.
That's interesting. Andrew, how have you seen?
Yeah, two things really. One is if you've followed the steps and you've generated lots of ideas, I think what's really important is not to try and shortlist. Usually what people will do is say, we've got 20 ideas, let's find the best 3. And the problem with that is the natural human way to do that is to deselect. So you're looking for 17 to knock out, and that puts you in a frame of mind of looking for what's wrong. And you'll find something wrong in everything. That's always going to be the case. So instead, I'm a big advocate of just giving people little green Post-it notes and telling them to go and stick a Post-it note on anything they like. And you get a kind of natural peer review heat map of where the best stuff is, and then take top 3 from that. So don't create shortlists is number 1. The second thing is don't be bold. Don't be bold. Think like a banker. Because it took me way too long to learn this, but we all try to encourage people to be bold, and most people don't want to be, understandably. And we did a campaign in Australia for the National Australia Bank, which is called the Big Breakup, and it was on Valentine's Day. We publicly broke up with the other banks and said, it's not us, it's you. We're fed up with you lying and you're cheating. We're going our own way and all this stuff. Monstrously successful. I went to see the CEO of the bank, and I said that was a really bold thing to do. And he looked at me like I had 2 heads and said, "You're out of your mind. I'm not paid to be bold. I'm a banker. I'm paid to manage risk." And when your people presented this idea, they were talking about how great it could be, and I could see it could be, but none of us can know. What I did was I mentally calculated the downside. And I figured out that we wouldn't lose a corporate client, we wouldn't lose a retail customer. The worst that could happen is we might be laughed at for 3 weeks. I might be, embarrassed at the golf club, but after 3 weeks, the whole thing would wash by and we'd start again. And on the basis that I could live with that, we went ahead. And I think what tends to happen is we try and do one of 2 things: either encourage people to bold, which most people don't want to do, or worse, pursue certainty. And the pursuit of certainty will inevitably lead to the average. The closer you get to certain, the closer you will be to the norm. So instead of that, just think like a banker. Actually assess the risk, because it's usually nowhere near as bad as what you have running around in your head without thinking about it.
That makes sense. And I know both of you are big believers in being the same room as your team when you're generating these ideas and for the creative process. I wanted to ask, so what should the room itself look like to promote creativity? Janet, I can start with you as the architect.
Well, coming at it from, it's not just a room. Creativity is not a single activity. And so I come at it from what is the whole workplace? What's the whole workplace environment? It's about norms, right? It's our culture around creativity, but it's also all the programs and kind of infrastructure that you put together to make all that happen. And so you need to think about not just the room that might be the co-creation room, but all the spaces that people need in terms of choice and autonomy of how they work. How I come up with an idea and may feel comfortable reaching out to you. I've got this crazy idea. We need a confidential area to talk about it. And then once I feel good about it, then I'm going to take it to the 2 of you. And then it may be a different type of space. And so the whole environment needs to be around spurring creativity, being inspired, seeing visible work so that you start connecting ideas. And it's not just a single space, but how can the entire environment start to spur and be a place that people want to go to day after day.
Andrew, I know you have some great tips about this.
I do. And if you don't have the luxury of developing the entire space to be conducive to it, which I agree with you, it's just sometimes hard to do, then you need a room. The room needs to be separate from the place where people normally work, because you've got to take them out of their day-to-day in order to unlock some of their creativity. It should be big enough to have 12 people move chairs around, because you want to put them in groups from time to time. There should be no table, because tables are things that people adopt power positions in, and they also make it possible for people to hide. So the whole idea of get around the table and solve it, forget it, no table. And no whiteboards, because whiteboards are really good for mapping out a process. They're not good for collecting lots and lots of ideas, because you can only put a new one up by taking one down. So you need walls and windows that you can stick big Post-it notes on. You need the air conditioning to be cool when you walk in. Warm when you walk in, but then you need to be able to cool it down as the place gets hotter and hotter. And you need food.
Yes, food and coffee.
Food needs to be, but it should be outside the room so that people can have a few ideas when they're going out and coming in. and no pizza or shrimp.
Yeah, you don't want those strong smells coming
Definitely
in.
not.
Yeah, as you were walking to the speaker lounge, I was like, great, we took out that whiteboard, but we've got this big old table that we can't take out. So I'll go off the stage and try to work on
Fix
that
that.
now. But until then, thank you both so much. And
Thank you.
yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.